Hello everybody! I needed a quick video to film for today, so you are getting a book haul. This is my July 2018 book haul, and it's a bit bigger than I had planned for it to be, but around the 4th of July I went on a trip to visit a friend, and while we were out and about, I, of course, found the bookstores that had some really excellent science fiction, and I grabbed a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to first go over the books that I've received from publishers, then the books that I have already read, and then I will get into the unknowns, which are the ones that I don't know very much about and I haven't read yet. This first book I actually received at the end of June from the publisher Tor, but it's a July release, and that is The Calculating Stars by Robinette Kowal. I have already read this. I completely loved it. I loved everything about this book. It's one of my favorite reads of 2018 so far. And I did do an entire review of it, which you can go watch if you want to see me gush for a long time about this. But The Calculating Stars is the first book in the Lady Astronaut duology. The sequel called The Faded Sky is coming out in a couple of weeks in August, and I really cannot wait. I can't wait. So essentially this is set in an alternate timeline. In the 1950s, a meteor strikes the eastern seaboard of the US. It takes out Washington, D.C., and the fallout from this basically means that the planet is going to become inhospitable to humans, and this speeds up the space race and the drive to create a moon base and eventually colonize Mars. And the main character is a woman named Elma York. She's a mathematician, and she was a WASP pilot in World War II, and she wants to become the first lady astronaut. The other book that Tor sent me in July is this big beast of a book. It's almost 600 pages, and this is An Informal History of the Hugos, a personal look back at the Hugo Awards from 1953 to 2000 by Jo Walton. I have also already read this. I inhaled the entire thing in about 2 days, and I made a lot of Goodreads status updates on it. It was a little bit crazy. But this is a collection of blog posts that Walton did for Tor.com between 2010 and 2013, in which she went through the short list for the Hugo Awards, every single category, but mainly focused on the best novel category, from 1953 up to 2000. She was essentially doing this project to analyze whether the books that were nominated and won were really indicative of the quality and type of work being published in those years, and like if the winners were truly representative of where the field was at that point. So it is very personal, it's very informal, it's very much based on Walton's own experience with the books that she's read or hasn't read and what she thinks of them, but she is very broadly and deeply read within SFF, so her opinion I think carries a lot of weight, at least for me personally. So some people may be familiar with Walton's previous collection of blog posts for Tor, which is called What Makes This Book So Great. If you've read that, you may expect that this is very much the same thing, and it is, but it contains a bunch of other content, including comments that people posted on the original blog posts, and those just provide a wealth of information. I loved it. I loved the context that it provided for me for the winners and these things that I've also read. So it was really excellent. Now for a couple of things that I've already read and I have talked about or I will talk about very soon. The first is Giant Days Extra Credit, Volume 1. I guess that means there's going to be more of them. This is by John Allison, and the artwork of the individual issues in this comic collection are by various people. So this is a collection of bonus stories in the Giant Days world, and I didn't think it was that amazing. The first story, which is an alternate take on what would have happened if the three main characters, Esther, Susan, and Daisy, hadn't met at university right away, that was interesting, but the other stories just really failed to capture my interest, so it was okay. Then we have The Wild Girls by Ursula K. Le Guin, which is a mini collection. The first story in this, The Wild Girls, was a reread for me, and then the other bits are a couple of essays, some poems, and an interview. I don't think there was any, like, coherent theme to this overall collection, but the individual bits were quite good and I enjoyed it a lot. This is one of PM Press's Outspoken Authors books, so they have an entire line of books that look like this, and I really want to go get more of them because this was quite good. And then I have Henry IV Part 1 and Part 2 by William Shakespeare. I just recently read these. I read Part 1 a week ago and I just finished Part 2 for Booktubeathon, and I'll be talking about them together in a wrap-up pretty soon. The short version is these are historical plays by Shakespeare. They're the middle two in the second tetralogy called also the Henriad. And I thought they would be kind of boring. I went into the historical plays thinking they would be kind of dry, but actually these are some of the most enjoyable Shakespeare plays I've read in quite a while, and I really liked them. I don't like Falstaff though. I don't think he's funny, and if I were to reread these, I would just skip everything with Falstaff. Next up are all the books that I haven't read yet and I don't know that much about, so we'll probably whiz through these pretty fast. The first one is It's All Fun and Games by Dave Barrett. This is the book that came in the very last Book Bath box, and I'm very sad that that subscription box is done now, but I really loved it. I really enjoyed it. This book I'd never heard of before, and it sounds like from the description that it kind of centers on live action role-playing or LARPing, and it kind of sounds like the fantasy world that this LARP group has created becomes real and they actually go there or something. I will find out. Next I have Courtney Crumrin and The Night Things by Ted Naifeh. This I had to grab immediately when I saw it in a used bookstore because I remember first hearing about this comic series from Maya, and in fact I think the first ever video I watched by Maya was her overview of this comic series, and I've always been keeping an eye out for it because of that. So I grabbed this first volume when I saw it, and I at the moment don't really remember that much about it, but I think I'm gonna really enjoy it. Next up is an anthology called Sisters of the Revolution, a feminist speculative fiction anthology. This is edited by the amazing team of Anne and Jeff VanderMeer. So I found this at this little hippy-dippy new age store that I hadn't been to in about a decade, but I went in there with my friend and I thought, oh, I'm just gonna go in there and look at their scarves and the incense and everything. And they had a huge book part of the store that I didn't remember at all, including this little niche of basically feminist science fiction. So all of the stuff you're gonna see next pretty much came from there, including this one. So this anthology I had never really looked into, but I had it on a wish list somewhere because it has the VanderMeer's name on it, and of course feminist science fiction. But also I was looking at the table of contents when I got it, and this is just really awesome sounding. Some people in here that I recognize: Kit Reed, Nnedi Okorafor, Eleanor Arneson, Kelly Eskridge, Angelica Goradischer with a story I've never read, so I'm really excited about that. Nalo Hopkinson, Lena Crone, James Tiptree Jr., that's the Screwfly Solution, which I've already read. I do like Tiptree. Rose Lemberg, Octavia E. Butler, Kelly Barnhill, Hiromi Goto, Angela Carter, Pat Murphy. I also love Pat Murphy. Joanna Russ with a story I've never read. Vandana Singh's The Woman Who Thought She Was a Planet, which is a story by her I've been trying to track down. Susan Palwick, Carol Emshwiller, Eileen Gunn, Tanith Lee, Karen Tidbeck, The Ever-Present Sur by Ursula K. Le Guin, Pamela Sargent, Rachel Swirsky, Catherine M. Valente, and a couple of others that I'm not familiar with. So this looks amazing and contains a bunch of stories I've never even heard of before, so I'm very excited. The next two books were also from that store, and they're both by Carol Emshwiller. The first is a novel called The Secret City, which I do not remember what it's about at all, but this is also one that I had on my wish list for a long time because I think I read a review of it by Ursula Le Guin and it sounded really interesting, so I grabbed it. And then this is a short story collection called I Live With You, and I don't believe I've read any of Carol Emshwiller's short fiction. This was published in 2005, and most of the stories in it are from 2002 to 2005, I think, so that's actually relatively recent. I thought it was a bit older than that. So I am all ready to dive into Carol Emshwiller's work. She's a name that I recognize, but I'm pretty sure that for some reason I've never actually read anything by her. These next two came from this excellent little used bookstore that I stumbled into. Usually when I find these hole-in-the-wall bookstores, they don't tend to really have science fiction or fantasy sections, just lots of used copies of Game of Thrones and Robert Jordan, you know, stuff like that. But this one actually had some very interesting things, and I grabbed a couple. So the first one, I think I actually squealed out loud when I saw this because I never ever thought to find a physical copy of it, and that is In the Forest of Forgetting by Theodora Goss. This is her short story collection. I was under the impression that she'd never published anything except for little short stories here and there until her novels came out in the past couple of years. But I was listening to her being interviewed on a podcast some time ago, and she mentioned she had actually published this short story collection about a decade ago, and I thought, well, I've never heard of that. I need to find that, and lo and behold, here it is. I don't think I've actually read anything from this. I've read a couple of her stories from more recent years, but not this one. I've heard of Letters from Budapest, and if I've read it, it must have been a reprint in Uncanny Magazine or something, so I'm very much looking forward to this. This other one is an SF Masterworks edition of The City and the Stars by Arthur C. Clarke. I don't know anything about this one. I don't even think I've heard it talked about before, but it's the last book by Clarke from the SF Masterworks line that I have to read, so I was keeping an eye out for it, and it fell into my hands. And these last two are July releases that I had pre-ordered, and I finally got my copies of them. The first one is Competence by Gail Carriger, which is the third book in her Custard Protocol series. And the other one is A Record of a Spaceborn Few by Becky Chambers in the lovely UK edition. I will always get these editions of her books because I think they're a lot prettier than the US covers. But both of these books I have talked about briefly in my upcoming releases video for the third quarter of the year, so I'm not going to talk about them again here, but basically very anticipated third books in series, and I hope to get to them very soon. And that is it for my July book haul. I really need to do a better job at reading things as soon as I get them in, but I have recently been very distracted by a bunch of library books I've had checked out. But we'll see how I do at getting some of these read in August. So let me know if you've read any of these, if you have any thoughts on them, or if there are any that you want to see me prioritize and read sooner rather than later. And thank you very much for watching. I will talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.